Alright, with this lesson we're going to focus on finding the percent of a number. And in order to do that, you get to choose which way you want to do it. You can do it with fractions or percents. That's entirely up to you. We'll also focus on writing down a question based on a visual model, and also see how this stuff could actually be used when you're determining something like sales tax. There are several skills that you need to have in order to do this one. You need to be able to convert percents into fractions. You need to convert percents into decimals, and multiply fractions and multiply decimals. Of course, if you choose the fraction method, you need the fraction skills. If you choose the decimal method, you need the decimal skills. Even if you're going to be using a calculator to help you out with some of the number crunching. Ultimately, when we're looking at 40% of 50, this is nothing more than saying we could take 40% is the fraction 40 out of 100, and we know that of means multiply times 50. Just taking that. Just multiply that. Set up your fractions, multiply them, simplify them, you're done. If you prefer the decimal method, 40% written as a decimal, moving the decimal over 2 spots, that's 0.40. So 0.40 of 50. Of means multiplication. That's all we're doing. It's been my experience, because you could use a calculator to speed up the number crunching, most students prefer to use the calculator here and just use the decimals, set up that conversion and go. So taking that approach, here we have it. 0.40 multiplied by 50. There's our answer. 40% of 50 is 20. And we're done. And I'll let you guys pick. Are we doing the fraction or the decimal method? Okay, if we're using decimals, we know that 0.3%, you have to move the decimal over 2 spots. So it's 0.003 of is multiply 120. So that's it. 0.003 times 120. Thus, 0.3% of 120 is 0.36. That is 36 hundredths. What about here? 33 1/3%? Well, again, you can choose fraction or decimal, but this is one that we mentioned it's really hard to work with as a decimal. That's why we said 33 1/3 is a fraction that you should have memorized. You should simply know that this is the fraction 1/3. That's one of the few things that are you really should memorize, and this will save yourself some work. So 1/3 of 45. We know how to multiply fractions. Straight across the top, straight across the bottom. 1 times 45 is 45. 3 times 1 across the denominators. And of course, 45 divided by 3. Come on, you can still use calculators if you want. Alright, so if you need to use a calculator to help you out with some of the dividing, 45 divided by 3. There, you've got 15. And we're done. 33 1/3% of 45. That is 1/3 of 45 equals 15. What about here? 1000% of 62. We're going to use decimals. 1, 2 places to the left. So 10.00 times 62, which of course is no different than 10 times 62. 10 multiplied by 62 gives you 620. Done. Here, write the question represented by this visual model. Then, of course, you have to answer the question. There are some very quick characteristics behind this. 100% is what you're recognizing. That's where you're of. The percent piece right here does the other piece. We're looking at 40% of 80. And then, of course, the answer, 32. Yeah, that's it. All right, last problem that we've got.
What is this?
When the Industrial Revolution came to London, the soot from all the factories that were being built actually started to cover the trees. You know, you had all the soot go up in the air from the factories, fell down and started covering up trees. Well, those trees were originally like a white and speckled gray. They're tree bark woods. But when you start covering them with the soot, all the trees started to turn black. The peppered moth used the tree bark to try to hide from birds. Originally, the peppered moth looked like this. And so when it sat on the speckled bark of a white and gray tree, it was harder for birds to see it. And of course, that made it harder for the birds to eat them. Well, as the trees changed colors, all of a sudden the trees were black, the moths had these specks of white, and so the birds could see the white sitting out against the black background on the tree, and only the moths that could hide, the only moths that could hide on the black trees were the black moths. In fact, black moths didn't exist at all before 1811. By 1895, 98% of the moths in London were black. So, if there were 40,000 peppered moths in 1895, how many of them were white and gray? Okay, so things that we need to recognize about this. 98% were black. So what percent were white and gray? Of course, the total has to be 100%. So if 98% are black, 2% are white and gray. So this is letting us know we are looking for 2% of the 40,000. And so there's our problem. What is 2% of 40,000? Exact same kind of problem that we were looking at. We know that 2% can be written as 0.02. So 0.02 of 40,000. We can simply grab our calculators, helps out quick. 0.02 times 40,000. There, 800. So in 1895, there were about 800 of these white and gray peppered moths. By the way, this is actually evidence of evolution. When the environment changed and the trees got darker, the moths had to adapt so that they could survive. It's worth noting that people in England recognized, hey, we don't want to have all these dirty, soot-covered trees forever, so eventually they did go and clean the trees. After they cleaned up some of the factories so that there wasn't as much pollution, they did go through and clean the trees. And then once the trees went back to being white and gray, all of a sudden all those black moths were getting eaten. And now the white and gray moths are more common because the original environment got restored. The moths readapted back to the original environment through evolution. And that's it. We've seen that finding percent of a number can be used to keep track of things like the population of an insect species. And we know how to write out a visual model. The visual model just focuses on the percent of to equal your answer. And whether you choose to use a decimal method or you choose to use a fractional method, you should be able to calculate and find the percent of a number.